What do all of these garments have in common? Two things, actually. One, they were all featured in a video of a YouTuber that I follow. Dress Me Up Scotty recently shared her style inspiration for this year. I will link that video below in case you haven't yet seen it or you just want to go watch it again. The second thing these garments have in common is that they are actually very similar in pattern and construction. One could potentially use the same pattern with some slight modifications. Well, not this one. That's a completely different pattern. And this one, sort of similar, but a few too many modifications would need to occur. These dresses and these blouses are much more closely related. I began my process by partially draping and partially utilizing my ancient slip pattern I made. I truly don't remember when. If you want to make this and utilize an already existing pattern and modify it, I did locate some similar patterns. These could potentially work. And if you're wanting to make just a slip dress, this one might be helpful. Quick disclaimer, I have never used any of these patterns before, so I can't speak to the quality, but all are linked in the description in case you want to check them out. Another way to figure out the pattern for this dress, if you will be using stretchy fabric, which is what I thought I was going to use, spoilers, is to take the t-shirt from your previous job in which your employers did you dirty, so you don't really want to wear the shirt again, and just hack here, chop there until you get the desired shape, take it apart, and then use it as your pattern. It's actually quite therapeutic and definitely safer than my usual forms of therapy. Oh, by the way, I completely neglected to mention that I am recreating this dress by Nour and the Merchant. Loosely recreating. I decided to not include the ruffle at the bottom, and any sort of embellishment and or embroidery would simply have to happen later. Maybe. And if you're wondering, why did she choose yellow? We'll get to that. I made the sleeve pattern with the assistance of the sleeve from my shirt pattern. If you want to know how I made that pattern, you can check out this video on the Instagram. Link in the thingy. This is the fabric that I will be using for the dress. Unfortunately, I had it in my head that this was stretchy. It is not. I do not know why I thought that. I made a mistake. I was incorrect. This is the only velvet fabric that I have that will work for the dress, and I really didn't want to use it, and I haven't used it because every time I look at it, I see Big Bird. I put it to an Instagram poll and it was about half and half.
Yes, totally Big Bird vibes. No, definitely not.
But I also posted it to the YouTube community page and a lot of you said that it looked real, royal, and like a fancy chair. So I think I'm still gonna use this. It's bright. I'm just gonna go ahead and cut it out and we'll see how it goes. I might try cutting it on the bias. Yeah, I don't recommend you do that. I have been experiencing some weirdness of the brain function again. It's not a big deal. It has simply caused me to put the refrigerated goods in the cupboard, cut out a dress pattern after incorrectly calculating the amount of fabric needed, hence destroying my project. Twice. 2 projects destroyed. And pulling out of a complete stop right in front of a semi driving 60 miles per hour, but you know, it's fine. I'm fine. All that to say, cutting the bodice on the bias is not always best. There are a lot of factors involved, and my brain was not functioning at the capacity to comprehend said factors. And here are the pattern pieces, although I did end up modifying top front and the front midriff for a more dramatic point, and I also gave it a center front seam to make it a little more tailored. And now for the sleeves. Eventually I'm going to sew up this seam here to make it possible for my arm to slide through the cylinder, but before I do that I have to cut out the bottom portion of the sleeve. I'm going to measure the width of the upper sleeve at about 1 inch or a little more for some ease, and that gives me my width. And then the other thing I'm going to measure is my arm just above my elbow and to my wrist, and that's going to give me the length. Then I made sure to flare the bottom out just a little bit, giving me this subtle trapezoid shape. In hindsight, I could have made the flare a little bit more dramatic and it probably would have looked better, but I think this turned out just fine. The top edge would need to be eased with a large stitch, and then I folded the edges under just about 1/4 inch and stitched the edges down, and then I folded them over again and stitched them down again for a nice finished edge. Then it was time to attach them to the upper sleeve. I made sure to measure the seam allowance on each side, marking it with a pin, and then inserted the bottom half of the sleeve in between those pins, stitched it on, folded it in half, and finally stitched that seam to make that cylinder. I then attached the cylinders into the circles that are the armholes, and I have to admit the bodice was looking pretty fair. I did think about leaving it just like this, foregoing the skirt and wearing it as a blouse, but I continued onto the skirt. For the skirt, I cut out 4 A-line pieces, rather similar to the sleeve pieces, except much larger, and I did not cut these out on the fold since I had a center front seam in the midriff, I elected to do a center front seam in the skirt. I just stitched those together along the straight edges all the way up, except for on the back, leaving a little opening for the zipper, and then stitched them together side to side. I gathered up the top edge of the skirt by setting my stitch length at the biggest stitch and attached it to the bodice with a plethora of pins and then some thread, and removed said pins. Don't leave pins in your bodice, folks, unless you want to reenact that scene from The Crucible. The time had come to go on a quest for the rare species of a bright yellow invisible zipper. I was unsuccessful in this endeavor. Though I did find some matching zippers, they were neither invisible nor were they long enough, so I just ended up using this zipper I had on hand. I inserted that zipper and then hemmed the dress by turning the edge under about 3.5 inches. I gave it a good sized hem so that I could let it out if anyone taller than me wanted to borrow it, and with that, the dress was finished. After that, I would have rode off into the sunset in my carriage, but it appears rogues felled a tree right across the path to rob unsuspecting travelers. But they must have gotten bored waiting because they were nowhere to be seen. Also, I have no carriage. I'll have to manifest that. Anyway, the tree needed to be dealt with, so while others did the actual work, I scurried around filming clips to make it look like I know how to do manual labor.
There we go. That's why I came here, for the photo op.
As promised, here is how I manipulated the pattern to make a slip dress. This is the fabric I selected. You may or may not recognize it from a previous video. I had some left over, and it's a silky fabric with a nice weight, so I thought it would be perfect for a slip dress. I took the pattern that I had just made, and then I marked it at the shoulder a little less than halfway from the armhole. And then I just drew a straight line down about 3.5 inches. That is where I want the top of the triangle, so to speak, to be. So I'm going to draw from the armhole up to that point. And then also from that point towards the front of the bodice, I'm going to create a kind of rounded triangle shape. In the previous design, this pattern piece was covered with a bias strip along the front edge, so I didn't need a seam allowance, but I needed one on this dress, so I just took a scrap piece of paper and added it onto the edge so that I could add a seam allowance. And then I just followed those lines I drew and chopped off the shoulder, and that is my front piece for a slip dress. And now for the back. Simply lop off the top straight across from the underarm. Make sure to complete the fold mark that was chopped off, and there is the back. I cut out all those front and back top pieces, making sure to double each cut, so 4 of each in total. Then I cut some strips out for straps. Strips for straps. Say that 5 times fast. I think I was very much in the mode of cutting out 4 of each because for some reason I drew 4 straps in chalk. And this is me confused about why I drew out 4 straps when I only need 2. Oh well, and I didn't even end up using those straps anyway. So here are my front pieces, 4 of each, and my back, also 4 of each. And if you wanted to do something a little more like this dress, you would cut the same exact back piece, but for the front, you would alter it just a little bit. Instead of having this slope, you would have it go a little higher and then go in a sharp right angle down. So the seam allowance would be right along that straight edge. So the pattern piece would look a little more like this, as opposed to this. And now it's time to adjust the front and back midriffs. Midriffy? I'm not sure how to say the plural of midriff, but whatever. All that has to occur is a little length and a little flare. Just extend those into skirt pieces according to the length you require from waist to floor. Then I stitched the bodice pieces side to side, front to back. The reason for the duplicate bodice is to serve as lining. And then it was front skirt to back skirt along the sides. And then bodice to skirt, pulling up gathers to fit. Here's where I determined that I hated the tiny spaghetti straps I had made. I realized I preferred more fettuccine style straps. So I cut out some wider strips, folded them in half, stitched them into a cylinder, trimmed the seam, turned that cylinder right side out, and pressed it flat into fettuccine. Yes, I definitely prefer fettuccine straps to spaghetti. After that, I was able to insert them into the bodice, which I could explain how to do, but you may have already seen this video where I do think I explained it fairly well, and I do dislike tedious repetition, so I will spare you. But if you haven't seen it yet, check it out for a decentish explanation on how to insert straps. After that, I secured the lining to the waist and finished the edge neatly with a serger, but you can also use the zigzag stitch on the sewing machine. Then it was time for stretching. Because of the bias cut, hemming had to wait, so I slipped the slip onto a hanger and hung it up overnight. This was my view from where I sleep. Let's just say I was hoping the spectral hanging creature wouldn't cause panic were I to wake in the middle of the night. It was just a tad creepy. Once the dress had put in its time on the hanger, it was allowed down for some trimming, and then a simple turn under and press, and then another turn under and press, and a stitch, and the dress was complete.